Greetings. My name is Dr. Jonathan Jones, and I serve as the Director of Research and Scholarship for the American Alliance for Theater and Education, AATE, and I am happy to be presenting this video, which is for the 2023 Research Awards, and in particular, it will include presentations from our two honorable mention award winners this year, both for distinguished dissertation and distinguished thesis. Before we get to those presentations, I did want to offer gratitude to the tireless efforts of our Research Awards co-chairs this year, Dean Rollins Harris and Dr. Manuel Simons, and also to the many members of our Research Award Committee this year who read dozens and dozens of pages of manuscripts, not just for the time and effort that took, but also for the substantive, thoughtful, engaging, generative feedback that they provided to the many folks who submitted their works for review this year. I know that it took a lot of time to read the materials and to write the feedback that you did, and I am really personally grateful to each of you for the work that you did. And for those of you who are watching this presentation, I hope that you find these presentations to be as engaging and invigorating as we did. And also that it might encourage you perhaps to submit your work for the thesis or dissertation award in the coming years, or perhaps to encourage others to submit their work. With that said, we are going to first see a presentation for the Distinguished Dissertation Award Honorable Mention, which is going to be presented to Dr. Zena. Zena received their EDD in Leadership from Lewis and Clark Graduate School of Education. And the title of Dr. Zena's dissertation is Participatory Action Research and Theater, Decolonizing Secondary Theater Education Through Process-Based, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy and Methodology. Before you see Dr. Zena's presentation, we did want to share with you some of the feedback that our committee shared with Dr. Zena about their work. The prose is compelling and engaging, beautifully and thoroughly documents the process and the implementation of the methodology. The candor, thick description, and centering of student voices effectively demonstrates that the author challenged theirself at every step to walk the talk of disrupting outdated and oppressive practices in theater education. So innovative and important. I think this is exactly where theater education needs to go. You did the hard work and pushed yourself out of the status quo to effect real change, not only in the co-researchers' lives, but in theater education as well. And finally, the project analyzed in the dissertation was undertaken with courage and commitment to bringing secondary theater education into the 21st century. Its candid reports of glitches, obstacles, and unwitting repetition of old habits are inspiring. And with that feedback in mind, I am now happy to present Dr. Zena.
My name is Zena. I have been teaching for almost 30 years, and I love teaching theater. I love theater. As a matter of fact, I can remember being young and how theater saved my life. And as corny as that might sound to the non-theater people, I'm pretty positive that all the theater teachers you know can also identify that moment in their past. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bet that almost all those theater teachers can identify student stories of how theater has saved their lives. Unfortunately, and because of that, we, and at least not completely because of that, but in part because of that, we believe that theater is very inclusive, that it is a space for all students to come and for all of us to share together. But unfortunately, there is a problem in that understanding. And that is that we are not as inclusive as we think we are. I asked the student members of my co-research team if I could use a song that one of them wrote to help position this problem for us. And so what I'm going to show you next is actually what they gave me in response.
I just wanna stay all damn day. It keeps me insane, it's my way, I don't play. Maybe play around shit. Talk about not listening. You don't listen to what I gotta say. I'm just living life. I'm just living right. I don't got time to fight. It's nothing on sight. Fuck all this hatred. I'm God created. We all make mistakes. Finding positivity. That's what it takes to put on a smile on every day. Every day. Yeah, I'm just trying to see the light. Find what's right. Find the right route. I don't need the cloud. That's what I just do this for myself. Helps my anxiety. Helps my sobriety. Finding shit out every day, man. We really gotta fuck society. Fuck society. Fuck society. Fuck society. Fuck society. Yeah. Fuck society.
So within this problem, I need to also position myself. I am a white, cisgendered, and able theater educator. And as such, I am a product of and perpetuator of harm through systemically oppressive theater education. And I recognize that I have a responsibility to own that and work to change that. And so because of that positioning, the questions become obvious. What aren't we doing in theater education that is causing this disconnect between what we think is inclusive and what is truly inclusive? What should theater education look like? What could it look like if it truly was inclusive? So as I dug into researching what wasn't working in theater education or what we need to do, it was clear that I needed to ground the work in theories specific to the realities of my marginalized students, but that would lead to benefits for all of my students, and add to the conversation about how we fundamentally and radically change what theater education can and should look like, and how we change the culture of our classrooms from systemically oppressed to culturally sustainable. Obviously, this work is timely. This is the conversation happening right now at the national level. So the first article's focus is on other people's research. So in looking at what the research says about traditional theater education is that it is very Eurocentrically focused in all of its manners. And so the stories and the identities and the representation are limited. In addition, theater education is mired in a need for legitimacy in two different parts. One, because of the college readiness that is also mired in the Eurocentric concepts, and because of the Broadway image of what theater production is and theater education is. And so there are images that already exist that we fight against or lean into. Additionally, despite the fact that at the state and national level, theater is considered a core subject, theater education is still under the fire of budget cuts almost every time they come around. So the fight for legitimacy to exist is huge. Because of the Eurocentric focus and because of the legitimacy, we find that a lot of theater education is product focused, whatever it is that is seen at the end as a product. And why is this a problem? Because in that, we are not telling all of the stories. We're not representing all of our students, and students are rendered invisible. Look at how do we construct a holistic theater education, which is culturally sustainable, which centers the students and breaks with the existing theater pedagogies and methodologies that are systemically oppressive, and how do we center the students' voices then? So Article 2. Using participatory action research as a methodological approach with high school theater students. The purpose of this article is to examine the methodology that I used. How does PAR, participatory action research, center the voices of high school theater students in the process of developing cultural sustainability? So what is PAR? PAR is a method of research where instead of a researcher who outlines and defines and decides and draws the picture of what's to be studied, and then the subjects who are then examined, it's a collaboration wherein everyone together is our co-researchers, where all the decisions are made as a team, how to work together, what we're examining, what the questions are that we're examining, how we get there, how we collect the data, how we analyze the data, and then what do we do with all of it? And so it becomes inherently liberating for all of the members, and with the goal, or well, not the goal, but the hope that there is a transformation that happens for the group and the individuals within it. So who are the co-researchers in this study? The call went out to the students in the school, and the only prerequisite was that they have some participation ever in theater. And so students came who I had never worked with before. And we ended up with 11 students who chose to participate, knowing that this was an advanced theater class, but that it would also be research-based and that they would become co-researchers in this team. We were fortunate in that the students who chose to participate represented the demographics of our school, and that was very powerful. We met over the course of 9 months, 2 to 3 times a week for 90 minutes each session. As we looked back at our research and when we were in the analysis, well, we analyzed along the way, but when we were at the end looking back, we could see 5 specific phases of our work, wherein the participatory action research really developed and grew deeper for us. And unlike many research projects which maybe go from point A to point B with hiccups along the way possibly, ours was most definitely more like a roller coaster. We had ups, we had downs, we went backwards a couple of times, but that was part of the process. It became really clear that the process of PAR had liberated the students in so many ways, and they claimed their own power as they grew individually and collectively. For me, it became clear how engaging in PAR had allowed us to engage with one another so differently. The dynamics, the intentions, the holding of care and compassion that extended to everyone, regardless of what had happened, while creating theater. It also reminded us that a healthy and supportive community matters to every student, and it looks different for every student. Article 3, participatory action research with high school students to decenter whiteness and center all students through decolonializing curriculum, pedagogy, and methodology. A major focus of this study was to center the voices and the truths of the students. So it is their voices who need to be heard in this next section. Because I cannot have my co-researchers here today, I have asked 6 of my former students to please read their words with the permission of those students. The first section is colonizing to decolonize. The students made a choice to attend a local competition, despite it representing what they felt was wrong with educational theater. Their discussion revolved around whether they wanted and needed to be representatives of the BIPOC community in a predominantly white space.
What if we showed up and participated as ourselves instead of as the event requires? What if we do all the things we do in this class, but do them there and basically show up and take up space and show people that we are there despite and because of all of the inherent oppression?
But what if no one notices? What if no one cares? Or what if people just think worse of us because of how we show up?
Do we really care what they think? Isn't that the point? I mean, no matter what, this isn't going to be equal and fair. Let's be real. But if we don't show up, then who will represent us all? Who tells these white people we exist? How do we get them to even start to listen to us? I mean, we got to start somewhere, right?
The conversation after the event.
Okay, I'm glad that we went. I know that it was super white, acting competition so white, but that was a decision we got to make, right? And what we each got to take away from it was something we each get to own. My voice in this decision-making process mattered.
I know, I feel the same way. I was so annoyed by all the stupid things we were subjected to there, from people assuming things about us and staring at us. But man, I was tripping at how cool it was to be there And even when I was annoyed, I was happy because I chose to be there. I chose that challenge. I chose to take this risk. And I think that's what this whole thing this year is about. Yeah, I know that we keep talking about cultural sustainability as this thing where we are keeping culture centered in a way that it doesn't like get broken. And being a part of this event felt like a small way to do that. Whether anyone noticed or not, we walked in there as ourselves, we performed our way, and we held our heads up high no matter how anyone else acted. I kind of think that's a part of what all this is.
Representation. Throughout the year, the co-researchers spent time choosing materials to read and see which they felt represented them.
For the first time, I felt like I was allowed to read about a family going through a struggle that wasn't about being oppressed or beaten up or lied to because of race. I got to read about a family, period. A family who was struggling with all kinds of life issues, normal things families deal with. And it wasn't as though they ignored the oppression around them. They just didn't make that what the story is about. And it made me feel so much pride. And then to act out a scene from it, to take those words into my mouth, in my head, in my body, to become this character who is a woman like I am going to become, and to feel her, that is what I've wanted for so long and didn't even know I wanted. And now I know what I want, and I'm never not going to want it. And it makes me really pissed off at all the other classes where I basically was supposed to oppress myself to learn.
Constantly in pain, with obvious anxiety, trying to be stopped inside sobriety, dying on the vine of this society, feeling so lost inside my own insanity, finding my way inside my skin, knowing it's right, even if it isn't white, spending my time looking to find myself inside the page and on the stage. And now it comes, I see my face on someone else, bringing me peace, bringing me joy, bringing me space.
White students differently empowered. Many conversations about whiteness took place within the group, but one which pushed two very close friends to have a more honest discussion became pivotal to changing how the students worked together in our space.
What are you talking about? I asked you to help me write this. Why would you think you don't have anything to say in this?
Because I can't talk about the Black experience like you can.
I didn't ask you to write about a Black experience. I asked you to help me write a scene about a Black experience.
But I can't be getting all up in your space, Lewis.
Yes, you can, man. Listen, you have a perspective, you have knowledge, and you have to use it to help us write this if we're going to talk to other white folks. You aren't like the ones we're talking to, Ben, but you know them. You got to help talk to them.
Ben and Lewis went on to work on the scene. Near the end of that class, Lewis brought up the conversation with Ben.
So I just want to say that what happened earlier made me uncomfortable, Ben.
Why?
Because I need you to step up, like say shit and stuff. Not just give me space to be me and Black, but to help us to show other folks what they need to know. What happened earlier, man? That felt wrong.
Decentering the white teacher. We had a turning point in the class, which we labeled the incident. It ended up leading us to our biggest breakthrough. After we completed the resulting project.
That last project we did, we totally made our decisions, but it wasn't as if you weren't a part of the decision process. We just never felt held back in a way by your actual presence. I think that's why we can say we are there.
You listened more than you spoke, and we didn't look to you for any approval. That was huge for us. I don't think we even thought about asking you for your approval. We just did it, and you rolled with us.
I also think that it was the first time we didn't even have to remind each other to keep working or stay on task. It was like what we were doing, it was part of us, so it just happened. I know my mom would say that isn't learning, but I learned so much. I know how to edit film, oh my gosh.
A different looking theater education. I asked the students as we met later, what they felt emerged from this approach to learning about theater that worked for them.
Are you mommy?
Our relationships, we're so tight now, like so tight. We can make mistakes and laugh and figure out how to fix them. We're not stuck waiting for someone else to tell us what to do.
Yeah, relationships. Like we can make plans and totally decide what we want to learn and then just do it. It feels amazing to be in control like that, to know that what I have to say matters so much and that I can actually do what feels right.
I realized that I care about learning. I think I always did, but being able to lead my own learning and to trust that I knew more than I thought I knew gave me a different view of myself. I'm smarter than I thought I was. Remember how you showed us those national theater standards and we all said we could take every one of them off by the end of the year, but in our own way? Well, we hit them. We're all smarter than we thought we was.
Not gonna lie, Miss Zena, this was hard, like really hard. And I thought about quitting at semester, sorry. But then I kept thinking about how much I got to say and do. And I'm only a 10th grader, so I never get to say or do nothing. But in this class, because I was part of a team, I had to say and do something. You all were counting on me to be part of this team and I didn't want to let y'all down, or me down, or Zena. And it was hard, no lie, but I'm so glad I did it because I think I believe more in myself. I can do this. But also, I felt like what I had to say every day mattered. What I wanted to learn mattered too. And that was kind of incredible.
This PAR thing is hard because we kept making mistakes or figuring out what we were doing wasn't working. But it was so cool to be able to figure that out for ourselves and to have the power to say what we were going to do about it. I didn't know what that was possible in school. I think one thing I know I care more about is being vocal part of class, and I think I know how to now without shutting folks down, especially folks who are Black and brown, who are always getting shut down in classes.
I don't think we could have done it if we hadn't become such a tight team. Honestly, I didn't like y'all at first. And I was the one who was always showing bad body language because I wasn't comfortable. But y'all kept listening to me and caring about what I had to say. So I didn't go away like I wanted to. Seriously, relationships are the shit.
In my analysis, I realized that one of the really important things that came out of what we were working on was a better understanding of what decentering the teacher meant, in order for our team to be able to identify the true emergence of a culturally sustainable class. Contrary to what I've had educators say to me, decentering didn't mean that I was not important or necessary as a teacher, or that I wasn't teaching, but that instead I served a stronger purpose as a supporter who amplified ideas and visions, and who was able to help the team when they needed help to find direction. In addition, because of the cultural sustainability that was developed, students were consistently engaged, their attendance improved radically, they spoke their truths, and they identified that because of this methodology and pedagogy, they were able to explore theater on their terms, which resulted in a theater education that was more relative to them than I could ever have taught it.
Our next presentation video is for the Distinguished Thesis Award, and the winner for honorable mention, which is Lucy Kania, who received their MFA in Theater Education from Emerson College. And the title of Lucy's study is Against Type, Fat Phobia, Bias, and Typecasting in Educational Theater. Again, just to share some of the feedback that our committee provided to our award winner here. This was innovative and really brings to light a marginalized community that we don't often talk about, and provides a welcome addition for the educational theater community, providing one of those "I wish I had this when I was younger" moments. And with that in mind, I am proud to share with you this video from Lucy. Please enjoy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Kania, and I am here today to present on my MFA thesis, Against Type, Fat Phobia, Bias, and Typecasting in Educational Theater. I just want to say thank you again to AATE for the opportunity to share this project with all of you. First, I want to share a little bit about me and my relationship to this work because it is very personal to me. I identify as a fat woman. That is a word that I embrace, although for most of my childhood and adolescence, that is not something that I would have been happy to call myself. It's not also, frankly, really a descriptor of how I looked at that point, but I was pretty consistently one of the largest, if not the largest girl in most of my classrooms and rehearsal spaces. And I feel that that really deeply impacted how I saw my body and how I felt about myself. From a pretty young age, I was quite consistently cast as roles that skewed older and had either a kind of promiscuous or a matronly quality, which is an experience I think a lot of larger girls and women can relate to. So when I began this research, I really wanted to investigate this phenomenon of typecasting in educational theater, especially when it comes to girls who are larger or curvier and how that impacts us. So this project has two major parts. It began as a pilot study conducted for my qualitative research course at Emerson College with Bethany Nelson. And then it evolved into a project of narrative fiction where I created sample materials for a young adult novel about a fat teenage girl in high school theater. So today I'll be sharing some of my findings from my original research and then a little bit about my process of using narrative fiction as a method of illuminating that research and an example of that work as well. So first, I also want to give a note on language. I use both fat and larger bodied as ways to describe bodies that are larger than what is perceived as the cultural norm, which is really upheld by the media and the white supremacist values of the society that we all live in. I would note that the majority of women in the US are considered medically quote unquote overweight or obese, wear plus sizes. So what we see as the norm in the media is really not truly the norm. And I use the word fat phobia to refer to what's also been called weight stigma, weight bias, obesity bias, anti-fat bias, sizeism, many different terms. I use fat phobia because I think it's the most direct, and it's the one I hear the most in these sort of fat activist spaces. And that's just what I use to describe a bias against larger bodied individuals, fat individuals. Again, we exist on a spectrum of size, right? So anybody who is perceived as sort of in proximity to fatness, whether or not that's how they would identify or even necessarily exactly how they're perceived. So when I began this research with this pilot study, the questions that I wanted to sort of answer were, what is the role of fat phobia in educational theater, in particular as it pertains to larger bodied adolescent girls? What is the emotional and psychological impact of fat phobia in educational theater on those girls? And how can theater educators do better? So I began with a literature review in which I found that there really was no pre-existing academic research on this phenomenon, or much written at all. So what I ended up doing was taking this kind of tripod approach where first I looked at weight stigma, fat phobia in general in society, and in particular, what its impact is on adolescent girls. I found that fat girls and women face discrimination in basically every facet of life, from romantic partners to doctors, teachers, bosses. Larger bodied women are perceived as less desirable, less intelligent, less hardworking, lazy. I think you are probably familiar with the stereotypes. And this really does have a negative psychological impact. Even perceived weight discrimination can lead to lower school performance, lower self-esteem, and increased depression and suicidal ideation in adolescent girls. Then I looked at casting, the practices of casting, and what could I find that kind of describes that process? Again, not a lot, but I looked at some research about casting, both from a cognitive science perspective as well as from a social justice perspective. And what I found is that most people agree that casting in general replicates the biases of the person doing the casting, whether that's a personal bias that they're aware of or just a kind of an implicit societal bias that they may not have interrogated. But interestingly, people also really believe that casting is a place where biases can be challenged, and that when you see a body on stage in a role that you wouldn't have expected, your brain has to challenge how it's viewed that type of person before, and you can truly retrain our brains in the way that we categorize people. And the final piece of this puzzle I was looking at was representation in terms of how fat, larger bodied women are represented in the media. And what I found is that there are sort of three fat-coded archetypes. So again, we're looking at Broadway, we're looking at TV, film, and these are the kind of 3 archetypes I found. The first is the matron or the mother. The second is the sidekick or the comic relief, the best friend character. And the third is the over-sexualized character, the whore. So the conclusions that I've come to here is that there's a real idea that size equals maturity. And this is probably something you've heard before. If a girl is larger, she's considered to look older and therefore sort of pigeonholed into these matronly roles, as well as the idea that size is funny, size is comedic, fat people are funny, not to be taken seriously. And that's how we end up with the sidekick, the comedic relief role. And then finally, we have the sort of over-sexualization of the large body, the excess, that leads to this sort of promiscuous sexualized character of the whore. And what we're really doing when we sort fat women, fat girls into these 3 categories is we are upholding the male gaze, really upholding the white supremacist heteropatriarchal male gaze, because we're saying that in order to play, say, a category that's not here, an ingenue, a romantic lead, you have to look a certain way, you have to sort of fall into these societal beauty standards. And any woman who does not fall in line with that is sort of pushed to the side and categorized in one of these other ways. I wanted to add that I didn't have a lot of time today to get into the sort of racial white supremacist origins of fat phobia, but if you are interested in that, there is a lot of research to that effect, and I highly recommend the book Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. So after I conducted my literature review, I went on to conduct some interviews. This, again, was a pilot study, so I will acknowledge the limitations of this. I interviewed 7 participants, all of whom were identified themselves as something along this spectrum of size, fat, plus size, curvy, stocky. All of them are currently in their 20s or 30s, all identify as women or presented as female during the time that they were participating in educational theater. All but one do identify as white, so that is a limitation here. But they did grow up all throughout the US, so I do think that this represents a spectrum of experiences from throughout our country. So what I found from these interviews were a couple of areas of concern that I identified where I think fat phobia is most prevalent in educational theater, which I identified as typecasting, again, looking at these sort of fat-coded categories that girls and women are pigeonholed into and how they reinforce conventional beauty standards, as well as costuming, which I won't get into a ton here, but I could have written a whole other thesis on that. And then looking at the impact of these experiences, which really across the board was this development of a low sense of self-worth as a result of sort of internalizing the messages about larger bodies that came along with these experiences of fat phobia. And then looking at how educators can improve our educational practices in this regard, which was really just primarily looking at examining these casting practices and confronting implicit biases and challenging stereotypes. So I did want to briefly share some of the words of my actual participants who shared very eloquently about their experiences, speaking about the limiting factor of this typecasting and how even at a very young age, they felt they were being told that they would never play a certain type of part, that they were not worthy of playing a certain type of part, both on and off stage, frankly, how that kind of messaging translated from you can't play a love interest on stage to you won't be a love interest off stage, as well as the idea of how fatness positions someone in proximity to an identity of color, looking at that sort of association, that white supremacist association. Well, as here are some words from my participants about how they feel theater educators can improve, in particular, looking at their casting practices and examining the implicit biases that they hold, really questioning, you know, can I do something differently? Can I look at these sort of patterns that I automatically assume and challenge them, as well as looking at opportunities for growth rather than simply casting students in the same types of roles over and over again, providing variation and challenging different skill sets. So moving on to the second portion of my thesis, and the question that everyone has always asked me, why a young adult novel? As I was thinking about how I wanted to continue on this research for my thesis and how I wanted to present it, I sort of began to conceive of it as a young adult novel. And there are a couple of reasons. One is that I always saw wanting to present this research both to theater educators and also to students. So I conceived of the research aspect as sort of geared towards theater educators. And I do have an article published in Arts Praxis last summer that I recommend reading if you're interested in that. But I also wanted something that could be geared towards students. And I felt that that would be something probably that was more story-based, a little more emotionally engaging. And I liked the idea of a novel for this. I like that idea because I think a novel is potentially easier to access than a play. Sadly, it's becoming the case that in certain parts of the country, any book that deals with issues of social justice is not quite as accessible as it once was. But I still hope and believe that with a library card and Amazon gift card, most young people can get their hands on a book. And they don't have to live in a city. They don't have to have access to a teacher or a parent that would take them to a play. It has been widely demonstrated that young adult novels have great educational value and activist value as well, in terms of helping students both see themselves and their own experiences mirrored in fiction, as well as accessing the lived experiences of people who are different from them and teaching empathy and teaching self-advocacy. I was sort of approaching this book thinking, well, I wanted to write about the experience of a girl who would represent my research and my lived experience, but I also wanted to acknowledge that there are a lot of other marginalized identities who experience discrimination, marginalization, and educational theater. And so I liked the idea that I could be embedded in this character's perspective, but also include other characters in her life who she would learn from. I also think that there is a need for more fat representation in young adult literature in general. That is a growing area of representation, but still not widely represented. And I wanted to sort of add to that canon. And just looking at my own strengths as a narrative writer as well. I love to write fiction. At the time that I was working on this thesis, I was actually, during the pandemic, I was working in a bookstore and I was reading a lot of young adult fiction. And I felt like this was just a method that would really align with my strengths and help me present my research and this story to the world. I had a sort of secondary research focus, which was how do other marginalized groups experience discrimination in educational theater? And I wanted to look at racism and colorism, homophobia and transphobia, and ableism. And again, found that there really was not a lot of pre-existing research on these biases in educational theater in particular. So I combined research that I could find on bias in schools and its impact on adolescents, as well as bias in entertainment and media. And then as I began to frame my story, I was asking myself, how could these students create an act of resistance? And what would the challenges and victories of such an act look and feel like for these students? So what was my process? I began with this research. From that research, I began to create characters that represented these different intersecting biases and identities. And then I began to position these characters in a story. Of course, as I'm sure you all know, the creative process is not linear. So all of these phases sort of fed into each other and circled around each other as I was beginning to conceive of this story. What I ended up doing was creating 7 original characters who represented different intersecting marginalized identities that I felt would be present in educational theater and whose experiences I wanted to address. And I conceived of these students as sort of teaming up together to create a protest show, putting on their own production when they felt that they'd been overlooked by their high school theater department. I've thought a lot about how to kind of best share the work that I created here. And what I decided is that I just want to read you an excerpt of the sample chapters that I wrote. This book is not complete, but I did write 6 sample chapters, as well as a complete outline and educator's guide. And I do hope to complete the book in the future and maybe publish it one day. So my perspective character in the novel is Mel Markov. She's a 17-year-old senior at Eastham High in fictional Eastham, Connecticut. She is white and fat. She's also a redhead, and she's a bit of an intense kid who doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the theater crowd. But she is a diehard theater kid who aspires to attend a top theater school for college and pursue a career as an actor. In the scene that I'm going to read for you today, she's just found out that she did not get a call back for the leading lady, Daisy, in her senior year musical, a fictional golden age musical called Just Getting Started. In fact, her only callback is for the boarding house matron, Mrs. Maplethorpe. Other characters in this scene include Mr. P, Mel's white middle-aged drama teacher, Aiden, Mel's best and only friend, and Mr. P's trusty stage manager. And also mentioned are Neka and Nasim, two other seniors who auditioned for the play but were overlooked due to their race and or gender presentation, and Natalie, the thin white girl Mel believes will be cast as the lead Daisy. Here we go. Mel, step into my office for a sec. My chest floods with hope. Mr. P is going to say they made a mistake, that they left me off the list by accident, or that he changed his mind. I might be able to make myself believe it if Aiden's face didn't look so grim. He's glancing between me and Mr. P like he's considering grabbing me and making a break for it. He doesn't, though, and neither do I. Mel, Mr. P prompts. I swallow again, trying to banish any lingering tears. I don't want to talk to him, and I definitely don't want to cry in front of him. But he might have some feedback for me. Good actors listen and improve. They have to be able to handle rejection with grace and keep going. This is a chance for me to show that I have what it takes. I walk past Aiden, ignoring the upset look on his face, and follow Mr. P back into his office. His walls are covered with show posters dating back 20 years, a cheerfully chaotic collage of colorful images and familiar titles. He settles into the leather swivel chair behind his desk and gestures to a metal folding chair opposite. Take a seat. The chair creaks under my weight. I stare at a poster for The Sound of Music from 2011 that sits just behind Mr. P's shoulder. The girl playing Maria spins with her arms wide and her skirt fanning out around her legs, superimposed in front of a picture of the Alps. With her blonde hair and her tiny waist, she looks a lot like Natalie. I conjure up an image of my armor in my head, heavy steel plates sliding into place over my vulnerable center. I know you must be disappointed, Mr. P says, resting his elbows on his desk and steepling his fingers. But I want you to know that you gave a wonderful audition. Your hard work hasn't gone unnoticed. I hate the way my heart leaps at the compliment. As feedback goes, it's gratifying, but not especially helpful. How am I supposed to improve if I don't know what I did wrong? Thank you, I tell him, because it seems like he's waiting for a response. He nods, but doesn't continue. His gaze flickers down to the moleskin notebook that sits open on his desk, like he's impatient to get back to it. It seems like he thinks this conversation is over, but I feel far from satisfied. Is that really all he summoned me in here to say? Was there something else I could have done? A different song or a different approach? Mr. P heaves a sigh and removes his glasses, placing them on top of the notebook. There's a conversation I've been meaning to have with you for a while. I've been putting it off because I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you're a senior now, and I know you are serious about pursuing this in college. I sit up a little straighter. I'm very serious about it. I see that. You have a lot of talent, Mel, as much as any student who has come through my program. And just as important, you show up and you work hard and you take direction. You may have what it takes to make it in this industry, if you stop trying to play against type. There it is. I guess some part of me was expecting to hear it, but the blow still hits home, a heavy thunk to the center of my imaginary breastplate. Play against type, I repeat. I know what he means, obviously, but for some reason I want to make him say it out loud. Maybe if he does, he'll realize how awful it sounds. An audience has certain expectations about what the characters on stage will look like. You don't look like an ingenue. He leans forward, giving me a sympathetic smile. I'm not saying this to be unkind, but I promise you, if you do go to college for this, your professors will tell you the same thing. If you want a career as an actress, you will have to do one of two things. Either you lose, he pauses to size me up, and my armor crumples beneath his gaze. I have to resist the urge to cross my arms over my stomach and fold myself up in a knot. Say, 75 pounds, or you embrace your type as it is. You may have a hard time when you're starting out, but you'll make do if you can find your niche. And eventually you'll age into the right roles. I thought I was prepared for this conversation. I was wrong. Every word is a blow to my armor, a hailstorm of little insults, leaving me dented and breathless. As if I never tried to lose weight. As if I didn't spend the better part of middle school cycling through every diet I could find on the internet, losing 20 pounds and then gaining back 30. Losing 75 pounds isn't going to happen. Not in any way that's sustainable or healthy. But what's the alternative? To resign myself permanently to the role of the fat best friend, to be at best the sidekick, at worst the loser, to wait until I'm 40 and I can start playing the same mom roles I played as a teenager? Suddenly, the unfairness of it all is more than I can handle. It's not like I don't know that it's harder to make it as a fat girl, that I would have an easier time getting leads if I could just find a way to make my body conform to conventional standards of beauty. But I can't, and I shouldn't have to. I want to ask Mr. P why he thinks it's okay to say this stuff, why he thinks it's okay that it's true in the first place. Why can't an ingenue look like me? Why can't it be enough that I'm talented and dedicated and hardworking, like he said? And even if it's true in the real world, why can't he make an exception this one time for me? But my armor has vanished, and I'm afraid if I open my mouth, I'll start crying. Mr. P can clearly see it on my face because his mouth twists in a pained expression. I'm sorry, but this is the reality of the theater industry. I've protected you from it for as long as I could, but you're going to find out sooner or later. This is a tough, unforgiving business. There's a reason that it isn't for everyone, and there's a right way to go about it. The path of least resistance. That's all I'm trying to say. I can feel the tears coming on again, and I know that this time I won't be able to stop them. I need to get out of here before I break down. Okay, my voice comes out flat and expressionless, but at least it doesn't wobble. Thanks, I'll keep that in mind. Mel, Mr. P begins, but I'm already out of my seat. I barely make it to the door before my vision starts to blur. Aiden appears at my side, saying my name and trying to grab my arm, but I ignore him. I shove open the door to the girls' bathroom, stumble into the very last stall, and crumple to the floor as a sob tears out of me. I don't even know if there's anyone else in here, but it's too late to check. All I can do is curl myself into a ball like I wanted to do in Mr. P's office, wrapping my arms around my legs and pressing my face against my knees to stifle the sound of my crying. What was the point? Years of taking whatever part I got and making the most of it, using every small moment to shine. Years of putting in extra hours helping build the sets and clean out the costume closet and organize the lighting gels to prove that I'm a team player. Years of voice lessons and acting classes to push myself to improve, dance workshops and spin classes to keep up my fitness. What was the point of any of it if I was never going to be enough? Mr. P's words echo in my head. There's a right way to go about it. If I go about it the right way, the Mr. P's of the world will never know that I'm capable of anything else. I will never know. If people like me and Neka and Nassim keep playing by their rules, they'll keep on thinking it's okay to leave us on the sidelines. We need to change the game. So finally, I wanted to share some of my takeaways from this thesis project. One of the really big ones for me was that we know from the lived experiences of marginalized students that these biases exist in educational theater. And they do have an impact, but there is little to no research on the topic. So if you are a researcher out there or a student and this is interesting to you, I highly encourage you to go conduct some research, go write some papers, because this is really missing from our field. I found that narrative fiction can be a really creatively fulfilling and effective tool for illuminating and humanizing research. The process of researching these biases and then creating characters whose life experiences reflected them and investigating how that would manifest in educational theater and how those characters would be impacted and how they would respond, for me was a really great way of sort of distilling all of the information that I had taken in and hopefully presenting it in a way that is accessible to a large variety of people. And finally, really the biggest takeaway for me here is that as theater educators, we all want theater to be a safe space for our students. I have heard that over and over again. I think many of us truly feel that way. But we need to walk the walk. We can't just talk the talk. We need to continually be putting in the work to challenge our implicit biases, the biases of the society that we all live in. We need to continually re-examine our practices to make sure that there are not certain students who are being marginalized or excluded from the way that we teach and the way that we cast and the way that we perform theater. So thank you all very much for listening to my presentation. Thank you to AATE for giving me this opportunity to share with all of you. If you're interested in talking more about this, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm gonna superimpose my email on the bottom of the screen because I forgot it. Thank you.
And there you have it. I am very grateful to our presenters for their work, just generally, of course, but certainly the time and attention that it took for them to put these presentation videos together. I want to also offer gratitude to our executive director, Alexis Truitt, without whom nothing would be possible, but also to the conference committee who have been working very hard to put this work together as well this year. Thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, I hope that these presentations inspire folks to submit their work for review in the coming years, and we will see you in 2024 in Chicago. Thank you.